The drill screamed into my skull at 3:14 in the morning, and I remember thinking about breakfast. Not pain, not terror, breakfast. The gruel they'd served in the holding cell had been grey, and I'd counted 17 weevils before I stopped counting. The tech priest's mechadendrite held my head in place with 6 points of pressure, and all I could think was whether they'd already fed my portion to someone else. The mind does that, I've learned. It hides in small rooms while the house burns down. They don't sedate you during preliminary cortical mapping, not for someone like me. Not for an archival clerk who missed a filing deadline by 47 hours during a subsector audit. The administratum doesn't waste anesthetic on clerical errors. I'd been told this the night before by a trustee with a brass collar where his jawbone used to be, and he'd told me the way you'd tell someone the time, flat, factual, already bored by his own words. The smell came first before the pain organized itself into something I could understand. Burning bone has a sweetness to it that shouldn't exist. It's almost floral, almost pleasant. Then the sweetness curdles into something else, something chemical and wrong, like incense left too long in a damp crypt. I could smell my own skull cooking and my body tried to vomit, but the restraints held everything in place, so I just tasted acid at the back of my throat while the drill descended another 3 millimeters. I'd worked for the administratum for 16 years, subsector archives, division tertius, document retention and ephemera preservation. My station was on the 4th sublevel of the administrative complex in the Hive City's mid-spine. No windows, strip lumens that flickered every 7 seconds by my count, though no one else ever noticed. I catalogued shipping manifests for grain shipments from the agri-zones, hundreds of thousands of documents, millions, an endless river of paper describing wheat and rye and barley moving from one zone to another, feeding the hive, keeping the machine alive. I'd been good at my work, efficient. I'd received a commendation once, a small bronze seal I'd kept on my desk until someone stole it. I'd filed every document within the required time frame for 16 years straight. 16 years. Then came the audit. Then came the backlog from Sector 7, where a warehouse fire had destroyed 3 months of physical records and everything had to be reconstructed from secondary sources. Then came the deadline I missed because I couldn't verify a shipment of winter wheat that might never have existed in the first place. 47 hours late. A single filing. One document in an ocean of paper. The administratum does not forgive. The drill withdrew, and I heard fluid dripping onto the steel table beneath my head. My fluid. Something inside me that was supposed to stay inside. The tech priest made a sound like a satisfied hum filtered through a Vox grill, and I felt his cold fingers, 3 organic, 2 augmetic, probing the hole he'd made. There was a clicking sound, metal against bone. He was measuring the depth. Compliance acceptable, he said to someone I couldn't see. His voice was barely human, more like a door scraping open in an abandoned wing. Proceeding with cranial plate removal. They'd shaved my head 2 days before, in the preparation chamber. An orderly with a razor and a bucket of cold water. No mirror. I'd run my hands over my scalp afterward and felt the strangeness of it, the stubble and the scars I'd never known I had. A line across my temple from childhood, barely raised. I'd tried to remember how I got it and couldn't. My mother would have known. My mother had been dead for 30 years, incinerated in the hive's corpse furnaces, her ashes scattered into the recyc vents to fertilize the fungus farms. I'd thought about her while they shaved me, tried to remember her face. Couldn't. Tried to remember her voice. Couldn't. All I had was a sense of her, a warmth, a pressure, the feeling of being held, but no details. No proof she'd ever existed except for the scar on my temple and the fact that I was here, alive, about to stop being alive in any way that mattered. The saw came next. Not a drill, a saw. I could hear the teeth catching on bone, a rhythmic grinding that vibrated through my entire skull and down into my jaw. My teeth ached, my eyes watered. I couldn't blink because something was holding my eyelids open, some small clamp I hadn't noticed them apply, and the tears just ran down the sides of my face and pooled in my ears. The tech priest was humming, not a hymn, not a chant, just a low, toneless hum like a machine idling. I realized he was happy. This was pleasant work for him, routine. He'd done this 1,000 times before, and he'd do it 1,000 times after, and I was just one more body on the table, one more set of hands to be repurposed, one more brain to be scooped out and replaced with something useful. I'd seen servitors before, of course. Everyone has. They're everywhere in the hive, sweeping floors, hauling cargo, standing guard outside restricted sectors with las guns welded to their arms. I'd never looked at them closely, never let myself. They made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't articulate, so I'd trained myself not to see them, to let my eyes slide past them the way you'd avoid looking at a corpse in the street. One of them had worked on my sub-level, a heavy lifter, built from someone who'd been tall once, broad-shouldered. It moved crates of archived documents from one storage room to another, back and forth, the same route every day. Its face was still mostly human, skin stretched over a steel substructure, eyes replaced with red optical lenses, mouth welded shut with a crude seam of scar tissue. It had a tattoo on its neck. A name, maybe, or a number. I'd never gotten close enough to read it. I'd wondered sometimes, in the quiet moments between filings, whether it remembered being human, whether some small part of it was still in there, trapped, screaming silently while its body performed its function. Then I'd force myself to think about something else, anything else. The mind has doors you can close if you're disciplined. The saw stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow, and the wet clicking of the tech priest's respiratory apparatus as he leaned closer. I could smell him now, oil and incense and something rotten underneath, like meat going bad in a sealed container. Subject remains conscious, he said, optimal. Cortical resilience indicates suitability for Category 4 integration. Proceed with extraction. Extraction. The word hung in the air like smoke. I didn't know what it meant. I was about to learn. They peeled back a section of my skull. I didn't see it, but I felt it. A terrible pressure, a sense of something fundamental being violated. There was no pain, not exactly. Pain requires distance, a separation between the thing that hurts and the thing that perceives the hurt. This was too immediate for pain. This was just sensation, pure and vast and wrong. Cold air touched my brain. I'd never felt air inside my head before, never knew it was possible. It was obscene. It was the most intimate violation I could imagine, worse than anything I'd feared in the holding cell, worse than any nightmare I'd had in the 3 days since my arrest. The air was cold and it moved slightly, stirred by ventilation currents, and I could feel it moving across the surface of my mind like fingers tracing patterns in wet clay. Something touched me there, probed me. A thin metal instrument, precise and cold, pressing into the soft tissue of my brain. I felt myself twitch, not my body, but my thoughts. A memory surfaced unbidden. Standing in the archive on my first day 16 years ago, looking at the endless rows of shelves and feeling something like awe. Then it was gone, snipped away, and something else took its place. The taste of the morning gruel, the weevils, the trustee's brass collar. They were paging through my mind like a catalogue, sorting, evaluating, deciding what to keep and what to discard. I tried to speak, tried to scream. My jaw was clamped shut. The only sound I made was a thin whine from somewhere deep in my throat, barely audible, pathetic. The tech priest didn't react. Maybe he didn't hear. Maybe he heard it so often it no longer registered. Locating motor cortex, he said. Another probe, deeper. My left hand spasmed against the restraint, fingers curling into a fist I didn't command. Confirmed, mapping for industrial locomotion protocols. Industrial locomotion? I was going to be a heavy lifter, like the one on my sub-level. I was going to move crates until my body wore out, and then they'd recycle whatever was left and use it for something else. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt something like relief. At least I'd still have a function. At least I'd still matter, in some small, terrible way. Then the extraction began. They used a tool I couldn't see but could hear, a wet sucking sound accompanied by a high-pitched whine. I felt parts of myself disappearing. Not memories, not yet. Something deeper. The foundations, the architecture, the sense of being a person who had memories rather than just a collection of impulses firing in the dark. I'd had a sister once. I remembered that now, vividly, though I hadn't thought of her in years. She'd died young. Some childhood illness that swept through the lower hive levels like a tide. I remembered sitting beside her pallet while she coughed blood into a rag. Remembered the way our mother had prayed to the God Emperor with a desperation that felt like watching someone drown. The memory was sharp and clear and precious, one of the few things I had left that proved I'd had a life before the archive, before the filing, before the missed deadline. Then it was gone. Not faded, gone. Removed. I could remember that I'd just been remembering something about a sister, but the content was absent, scraped away, leaving only a blank space where something important used to be. I tried to hold on, tried to reach back into that space and retrieve what had been taken. There was nothing there, just emptiness. They took more, faster now, working with the efficiency of long practice. My first day of school, gone. The name of the hive city, gone. The face of a woman I'd loved or thought I'd loved 30 years ago in the Hab block dormitories, gone. Every memory that wasn't directly relevant to basic function and obedience was being excised, carved out, discarded like spoiled meat trimmed from a carcass. I tried to scream again. This time I'm not sure if I was screaming or if the scream was one of the things they'd already taken. The tech priest's voice, resistance detected in the limbic interface, adjusting suppression protocols. Something new entered my skull, not a probe, something that spread, something liquid and warm that moved through the channels of my brain like ink through water. It didn't hurt. It felt almost pleasant. A warmth that promised safety, that promised the end of fear. I felt myself relaxing despite everything, felt the tension draining from my muscles as the chemical cocktail did its work. This was worse than the pain. This was my body betraying me. My own neurology being turned against me, rewritten to accept what was being done, to cooperate, to submit. I thought about the administratum. The forms I'd filed, the manifests I'd catalogued, the endless grey routine of my work. I'd hated it sometimes. The tedium, the meaninglessness, the sense of being a very small cog in a very large machine that ground forward whether you existed or not. But it had been mine. My life. My choice to stay, to file the documents, to show up every morning and sit at my desk and do the work. Now even that was being taken. The memory of my work was being extracted and repurposed, stripped of context and meaning, reduced to pure function. I would still know how to lift, how to carry, how to obey, but I wouldn't know why. I wouldn't know that I'd ever been anything else. The worst part was the time. They weren't rushing. This wasn't an emergency servitor conversion, the kind they do on the battlefield when they need bodies fast and don't care about quality. This was careful, methodical. They were taking their time because they wanted the result to be perfect, to last, to serve for decades. They were doing this right. Hours passed, I think. Time had stopped meaning anything coherent. The strip lumens overhead flickered in the same 7-second pattern as the ones in my office, and I counted the flickers compulsively, the only anchor I had left. 43 flickers, 301 seconds. 5 minutes and 1 second. Then I forgot what I was counting. Then I remembered. Then I forgot again. My name was being taken. I could feel it slipping away, syllable by syllable. I tried to hold on to it, tried to repeat it to myself like a prayer. It was important. It was the last thing I had that was mine. 3 syllables, 2. I couldn't remember, couldn't hold the shape of it in my mind long enough to preserve it. The tech priest's tool moved deeper, and my name disappeared into the surgical waste, just another piece of unnecessary data. I'd been someone. I'd had a mother and a sister and a woman I'd loved. I'd had a job I'd hated and been good at. I'd had a life. It hadn't been much of a life. No glory, no significance, nothing that would be remembered or mourned. But it had been mine. No one had given it to me. No one could take it away, except they could. They were. They had. The chemical warmth spread further. I felt my sense of self beginning to dissolve at the edges like paper in water. The boundaries between me and not me were becoming unclear. I was the table, I was the restraints, I was the tech priest's humming and the drill's scream and the smell of burning bone. I was everything and nothing, and soon I would just be the function they needed me to perform. A new sound, the hiss of pneumatic injectors. I felt something cold entering my spine, spreading down my back like frost. Augmetic integration. They were beginning the physical modifications now, replacing muscle with synthetic fiber, bone with reinforced ceramite. My body jerked against the restraints as the foreign material spread through my tissue, my immune system trying uselessly to reject the invasion. Spinal integration proceeding nominally, the tech priest said. Subject tolerance acceptable. Subject, not person, not even prisoner. Subject, a thing to be studied and modified and used. I wanted to die. The thought came suddenly, clearly cutting through the chemical fog. I wanted to die before they finished, before they took the last pieces, before I became the thing they were making me into. But I couldn't die. My body was being reinforced, optimized, made more durable. I was being made harder to kill even as I was being killed in every way that mattered. The irony would have been funny if I'd still had enough of myself left to appreciate irony. More probes, more extraction. They were in deeper now, taking things I didn't know I had. The ability to feel joy, gone. The capacity for curiosity, gone. The small, quiet voice that had sometimes whispered to me in the dark moments of my life, telling me that things could be different, that there was more to existence than filing and fear, gone. I was being simplified, reduced, made efficient. The tech priest spoke again, his voice filtered and distant, approaching final cortical restructuring, implementing obedience architecture. Obedience architecture. The words made sense individually, but together they were monstrous. They were going to rebuild the core of my mind around a single, immutable principle: obey. Every thought, every impulse, every flicker of will would be filtered through that lens. I would still think, in a way, still process information, still make decisions, but every decision would lead to the same conclusion: obey the instruction, perform the function, serve the Imperium. I felt it happening. Felt new pathways being burned into my brain, channels of thought being redirected, dammed, cauterized. My mind was being turned into a maze with only one exit, and that exit was compliance. A memory surfaced, one they hadn't taken yet. I was young, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing in one of the hive's upper-level chapels during a mandatory service. The priest had been talking about duty and sacrifice, about how the God Emperor demanded everything from his servants and how we should feel grateful for the opportunity to serve. I'd been bored, restless, thinking about the games I wanted to play after the service ended. My mother had gripped my shoulder hard, her fingers digging in, and whispered, "Pay attention, this is how we survive." She'd been right. She'd been teaching me to submit, to accept, to make myself small and compliant, so the Imperium's gaze would pass over me. And I'd learned so well that I'd spent 16 years in a windowless office filing documents about grain without ever questioning, without ever resisting, without ever trying to be anything more than what they needed me to be. And it hadn't mattered. Survival through submission only worked until you made a mistake. Then they took everything anyway. The memory dissolved. My mother's face, her voice, the feeling of her hand on my shoulder, all of it gone. Burned away to make room for the obedience architecture. I wasn't crying anymore. I didn't know when I'd stopped. Maybe they'd taken whatever part of me knew how to cry. The physical modifications were accelerating now. I could hear the whir of surgical mechadendrites, the hiss of welding torches, the meaty thunk of bone being removed and replaced with something stronger. My left arm was being opened, the muscles stripped away and replaced with industrial-grade fiber bundles. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Alien sensation, foreign, wrong. My arm stopped feeling like my arm. It felt like a tool grafted to my shoulder, powerful but not mine. They did the right arm next. Then my legs one after another, breaking and reinforcing the bones, replacing the knee joints with pneumatic actuators. I was being made into something that could lift 300 kilograms without strain, that could work 20-hour shifts without rest, that could serve until the mechanical components failed and my organic remains rotted away inside the augmetic shell. My face was next. I felt the scalpel cutting away the skin, felt the cold kiss of the surgical laser as it reshaped my jaw. They were removing everything unnecessary, ears, nose, most of the facial muscles. No need for expression when you're a servitor. No need to smile or frown or show any evidence of interiority. Just the minimum required for function, eyes for visual input, a mouth for emergency vocalizations, skin enough to keep the moisture in. The tech priest's fingers pressed something cold against my left eye. There was a terrible pressure, a wet pop, and the world went dark on that side. Then came the installation of the optical augmetic, the burning sensation as it fused with the optic nerve, and vision returned, different now, flat and colorless, overlaid with targeting data and carrying capacity calculations I didn't understand and couldn't dismiss. My right eye remained. They left one sometimes, if the servitor's function required depth perception. I was grateful for that, absurdly grateful, even though gratitude was becoming a foreign concept, a word I knew but couldn't quite connect to any feeling. The extraction intensified. They were in the deepest parts now, the core of identity, the self-aware observer that watches thoughts arise and makes choices about which to follow. They were killing me, not my body. My body was being improved, optimized, made into something more durable than I'd ever been. But me, the thing that had been filing documents for 16 years, the thing that had missed a deadline and been arrested and was now strapped to this table, that was being destroyed with surgical precision. I tried to hold on to something, anything, a sense of myself as separate from the machine they were making. But there was nothing to hold, no core, no essence, no soul, just processes and patterns and memories, and they were taking all of it, rewriting all of it, leaving only the minimum necessary for function. The God Emperor's mercy, they called it sometimes. I'd heard that phrase in the holding cell. The trustee with the brass collar had said it. You'll receive the God Emperor's mercy. I'd thought he meant a quick death. I'd been wrong. This was the mercy, to be given purpose, to be made useful, to serve the Imperium in the only way a failure could serve, to be property, to be function without doubt, action without hesitation, obedience without thought. It was mercy if you squinted, mercy compared to execution and waste, mercy compared to being fed to the corpse furnaces or the recyc vats. I would still exist in a way. I would still serve. That was more than most failures got. The thought didn't comfort me. Nothing comforted me. Comfort was being excised along with everything else. Time collapsed. The procedure had been going on for hours, 8, 12, longer. The strip lumens had flickered thousands of times. I'd stopped counting, stopped being able to count. Numbers were becoming difficult, slippery, unless they related to weight capacity or carrying distance. The tech priest spoke, cortical restructuring complete, implementing final neural locks, the last chains, the kill switches and loyalty imperatives that would make it impossible for me to disobey even if some fragment of my old self remained. They burned them deep into my brain stem, into the autonomic centers where thought couldn't reach. I would obey before I could even think about obeying. The decision would be made before consciousness registered the order. I felt them settle into place like shackles, felt the doors of my mind locking one by one, sealing away anything that might interfere with function. Rebellion, locked. Curiosity, locked. Self-preservation, locked. The desire to be anything other than what I was being made to be, locked. I was still conscious. That was the horror. They'd left me conscious through all of it, and I was still conscious now, aware of what had been done, aware of what I'd become. They wanted me to know, wanted some core awareness to remain trapped, screaming silently while my body performed its function. It made the Servitor more effective somehow. A fully lobotomized Servitor was clumsy, mechanical. A Servitor with a ghost of consciousness inside was smoother, more adaptive, better able to handle complex tasks. I would spend decades like this, moving crates, lifting, carrying, obeying. And some small part of me would remain aware, watching, unable to scream, unable to die, unable to do anything but experience the endless grey horror of existence without agency. Unless I was lucky. Unless they'd miscalculated and taken too much, leaving only the machine. Unless the awareness they'd preserved would fade over time, worn down by years of mechanical routine, until nothing remained but the function. I prayed for that. Prayed to the God Emperor I'd never really believed in, prayed for the death of my consciousness, for the mercy of true oblivion. Let me forget. Let me be only the machine. Let this awareness end. But I knew it wouldn't. The administratum didn't waste resources. If they'd left awareness intact, it was because that awareness served a purpose. My suffering had function. My horror had utility. I was being lifted now, moved from the surgical table to a vertical restraint frame. My new body responded smoothly, efficiently. The augmetic legs supported my increased weight without effort. The fiber bundle muscles in my arms coiled and released with perfect coordination. I was stronger now, faster, more durable, better, empty. A tech priest, the same one or another I couldn't tell anymore, attached a data cable to a port they'd installed at the base of my skull. Information flooded in. Carrying protocols, weight distribution algorithms, safety procedures, patrol routes. I absorbed it all effortlessly, my rebuilt mind processing data with mechanical efficiency. I knew exactly how to lift a crate without damaging its contents, knew exactly how far I could carry it before my organic components required rest, knew exactly what to do if I encountered an obstruction or received a conflicting order. I knew everything I needed to know except why I should care. The restraint frame released me. I stood on my own, balanced, stable. A tech priest inspected me with his augmetic eyes, scanning for defects, for errors in the integration. He found none. I was perfect, a perfect servitor, a perfect slave. Unit TK-739, he said, his Vox grill turning my designation into a crackling hiss. Proceed to cargo bay Theta 6 and await instructions. I turned. Walked. My augmetic legs carried me smoothly across the surgical theater, down a corridor I'd never seen before, through doors I didn't remember and wouldn't remember, toward a cargo bay where I would spend the next decades lifting and carrying until something broke and I was dragged back here to be repaired or recycled. I couldn't stop walking, couldn't turn around, couldn't scream. The neural locks held me perfectly, guided me perfectly, made me perfect. Part of me was still screaming, still thrashing against the chains, still remembering what it felt like to make a choice, to want something, to be human. The rest of me walked to Cargo Bay Theta 6 and picked up a crate. It weighed 243 kilograms, well within my carrying capacity. I lifted it smoothly and began walking toward the designated storage area, my optical augmetic calculating the optimal route, my rebuilt mind processing the task with flawless efficiency. Behind me in the surgical theater, they were prepping another table, another subject, another clerk or worker or soldier who'd made a mistake, failed a duty, disappointed the Imperium. They'd be brought in and strapped down, and the tech priest would begin humming, and the drill would start its scream, and they'd learn what I'd learned. That consciousness is not a gift, that awareness is not sacred, that the self is just meat and electricity, and meat and electricity can be repurposed, that the Imperium wastes nothing, not even suffering, especially not suffering. I set the crate down in storage rack 7B3, returned to the cargo bay, picked up another crate, 270 kilograms, well within my carrying capacity. I lifted it smoothly and began walking. The part of me that was still screaming had no voice. No one would ever hear it. No one would ever know it was there. I was TK739 now. That was all I was, all I would ever be. The crate was heavy. I carried it anyway, I always would.